Hello, I wanted to make a small little video for you today talking about a subject that I've really been reflecting on while I'm here in this location. So I'm at the Serpent Mounds in Ohio, which are actually very close to where I was raised and grew up. I spent majority of my young life here in Ohio. I moved out of here when I was 17 to Kentucky, and I have been to the Serpent Mounds before, but not since I was a child. So obviously coming back now as a pagan is a much different experience. So what I really want to talk about today is the sacredness of our world and the things that are slowly losing their sacred values, and the things that we've lost. And again, it's just so interesting coming here as someone who understands the old ways, not even necessarily the Native American connection. I mean, obviously the Native Americans built this, but someone who respects that, who sees that in the world and says this is a sacred thing, because this was built to align with the solstices and the equinoxes, and that's really cool. And that's just something that I feel like is getting lost in our modern world, but also what people who are returning to paganism see once again. So I hope you enjoy the conversation around serpent mounds and the history here, as well as the discussion around sacredness and how it left our world, but also how many people from around the world are slowly starting to return to the sacred. Now, before we dive too deeply into this video, what makes something sacred? What is sacred? And I really believe it's a human idea that we put onto something. We can look at something, and I talked about this in a video. Logan, bring me your stick. Bring me your stick. This is a good point for this. So let's take what Logan found at the store here today, which is crafted by someone that hikes around and finds really cool things to put on walking sticks. What would make this sacred? Is it just sacred because it has a goat horn on it? Or is it sacred because of the story behind it? And I would argue it's the stories we put to things that make them sacred. And so just purchasing this, while it's really cool, but the moment he starts going around and doing things with this, performing rituals with it, getting a story and a history behind it, this becomes something that has value. It has a story that is tied to something humanity created. But I would also say sacred comes from the natural world as well. So, finding something like this in the natural world, just in general, can be a really special moment. And, even things like flowers coming out of the earth, something that is done by the earth for us, I think can be seen as sacred as well. And then, of course, where we're at here at the Serpent Mounds can be seen as sacred because it was made by man, and then it's connected to the natural world as well. So yeah, I think that covers what sacred means. So the actual history of the Serpent Mounds here in Ohio is slightly shrouded in mystery as far as it was actual usage, but we do know it's over 3,000 years old, and that the mound itself lines up with the summer solstice and the winter solstice, as well as the equinoxes as well, as the sun sets around this, because we're kind of on a valley mound hill thing, and so it's a very good viewpoint for the sun as it sets across the year. And so typically in societies where they match something up with the equinoxes and solstices, it's assumed that it's a religious purpose, but the exact purpose is unknown, because this is a group of natives that actually were not around during the time of Western expansion, and so the actual history and the knowledge has been kind of lost to us, which is sad. But at the same time, it is nice that something like this was and is continued to be held as sacred, as there are many signs around here saying, of course, these are sacred monuments, which is kind of the conversation I want to have today, because as many people come here from all around the world, and mostly Ohio, they're going to notice, they might think, oh, I'm going to climb on these because it looks like they can be climbed on, but they're sacred things. This is a sacred place. And so it really needs to be beaten into people's heads that sacred things need to be respected, which of course, as pagans, we see much differently, because the sacred means something to us. Seeing something like this, sacred geometry, or seeing a spiral coil up like this, like the tail of the snake is right here. Of course, I'm looking at it and I'm like, I kind of want to meditate right there. Like, what kind of answers am I going to find right here? But it's not just the fact that it's here in Ohio, it's the fact that around the world we see examples of spirals and mounds being held as sacred or having an important part of the spiritual world. And this is something I plan on exploring later, which is the idea of labyrinths within shamanic practices. All around the world, we see labyrinths and mazes and spirals and things like this in shamanic practices. So it makes your mind really go on an imaginative journey, thinking what was done here. Did people start their journey here and walk their way doing a shamanic ritual all the way through the coil until it reaches the far end where it's kind of a mouth engulfing an egg in a central spot? I don't know, and that's really cool. So yeah, there's a lot of things to think about here, but ultimately the idea of sacredness is what I feel the most here as far as, you know, experiences walking around the mound itself. I think one of the reasons so many of us are returning to the old ways is because we see the disrespect of the sacred world, or at least nature in which we view as sacred, as we literally have... Where'd he go? He's way up there. Logan, yeah, he's up there. He is fetching some trash he's finding up there as we're hiking around these trails of a sacred burial mound. And so, yeah, I think it's just one of those things that so many of us, at least in the younger generations, have grown up seeing the disrespect of our world. And generations, you know, across, you know, the age range are just seeing that, you know what, maybe we should respect the world we live in a little bit more. I hope you're enjoying this video so far. I know it's kind of a lot of things going on, but you know, I really want to talk about it, especially since I was coming up here already. But what really gets me excited is seeing things like this. I mean, especially now that we've launched the GoFundMe for our nonprofit organization to finally build a hall, because something like this building would be very achievable in the first stage of our ideas. I mean, right now we're really pushing for the land, but we really want to get something like this as soon as possible. So if you want to help us in this fundraiser, want to help us live that dream of the hall and actually do it, please head over to GoFundMe. The link should be down below to our community website and think about supporting us there. Otherwise, if you want to support what I'm doing as a creator here at the Wisdom of Odin, please think about donating to Patreon. It's the only way I'm able to continue to do this full time and create videos like this. So thank you so much for however you're able to support myself or our community tied to the Wisdom of Odin. And otherwise, we'll get back to the video. Burial mounds like this can actually be found all across Ohio, and burial mounds in general can be found all across the United States and all over the world. Now, the people buried under them will be different depending on where you are, but something about building something like this is so inherently human. And even effigies or, you know, petroglyphs or just sacred symbols that hold some amount of mystery can be found all over the world. In fact, while I was in Germany, I was looking for a Celtic priestess grave. I've talked about this on the channel before a little bit. I still want to make a big video about it, but I will show some more of that footage here because it was really hard to find, and it was in a series of 3 or 4 different burial mounds in this little stretch, and it was off a hiking trail, and there was no signs for it, there was no markings, and yet you could clearly tell that it was a mound built by the Celtic people thousands of years prior. And the one in particular that I was in was a Celtic priestess grave, and there was still monuments and a small monument built there out of wood and gifts and offerings left there, and then the body was actually taken away and moved to a museum at some point. But actually being in there was a presence, and so that was thousands of miles away, and yet here we are at a different burial mound for a different group of people. And so it's just really fascinating that the sacred used to be so important to the people that came before us. In fact, I would argue it's only been since the globalization, and I wouldn't even necessarily say Christianity, but just the idea of, you know, civilization, globalization, the push for progress constantly has made us move away from the sacred. And yet now here, as we are pagans and people coming back to paganism and the global consciousness shifting to things like this were so important, and we need to return to the importance of these things once again. I think the only words I have for this location is it is really magical. I mean, coming to a spot like this, I mean, this is definitely one of the most celebrated pagan sites I've ever been to.
I mean, there is, religious markings from, a dozen different religions here, not just pagan, but Buddhist, Hindu, and, Celtic paganism, Wiccan. So this is definitely a site for many people that just believe in old magics. And you can tell, I mean, I could spend all day just walking around looking at all the things people have left behind. There's runes carved into the trees here. There's Mjolnirs hanging from, the central shrine there. And not just that, but nature itself has seemed to honor this spot in its own kind of way. I mean, the way the trees are grown around it, the way the moss is on the rock. Sadly, that's one of the reminders of the modern world here. It is absolutely insane to me that on this path is, evidence of an ancient Roman road and 2,000-year-old grave sites, and yet here is the S-spawn, right next door. So it is a very sad location in that way, just like the well was, is that there is that reminder of the modern world so close. But unlike the well, the power here is still prevalent, and the offerings here, I can tell that so many of these have been left recently. And of course, I have left my own now as well. And so to just sit here, I mean, I've had trouble leaving this spot. I've had trouble really even coming up with the words for it because it is so special and so powerful.
One factoid I can bring in that I've mentioned, of course, on this channel before is the fact that the Germanic people were very into burial mounds, and of course the Scandinavians as well. The Romans recorded that the Germanic people would have many of their council meetings or sacred meetings on top of burial mounds because it honored the person buried within, and it honored their idea, and there was definitely an importance to it. And burial mounds across Scandinavia have a lot of really mysterious stories. In my recent interview with Joanna Wittenberg about her books, the Viking Queen series, she was telling us that there was a thing with burial mounds that people would actually be buried in there, sealed in there while still alive, and have enough food and drink for a celebration, and then they would need to accept their death within the burial mound and would die in there, and it was seen as a way, like a rich person's way to go to Valhalla, I believe. So there is a lot of mystery to these things across the world, and the mystery and sacredness all combine into our collective human history. Now, I should say, of course, this doesn't take away that this is a native burial mound, and I believe something I read on a sign earlier said this was the Fort Ancient people, and so that should be honored, coming here to honor those people and what they held sacred, and something I believe the people here at the Serpent Mound do very well. In fact, we did look for trash, and we didn't find as much as we expected, which is really good. A lot of the times we come to places like this, and there's trash absolutely everywhere. Now, we still found about a half a bag's worth, but it's good to see that it was respected, and there was no trash really at all on the mounds themselves. So luckily, the employees here and the volunteers do a good job cleaning it up, or at the very least, people are much better at keeping a place like this fairly clean. And quite frankly, Ohio is quite dirty most of the time, but here was pretty good. Be sure to let me know down below what you thought of this conversation and join in the conversation. This is something that I think many people who come down the pagan path, no matter if it's Norse or Celtic or Slavic or any other, African, Native American, doesn't matter. This is a conversation that anyone gets connected to, the animistic religions, the tribal religions that feel connected to nature and the people who came before. This is something we all think about and all talk about. So this is a conversation we can all join in on. And again, this is something that I wish my parents would have taught me, but obviously being from a Christian background, they were not very interested. But thank you so much for joining me for this video. Look forward to hearing your comments below and what you think of the sacred and how it's slowly starting to return, but also the importance of that. But other than that, until the hall, Skull.